The last stage of software development, called deployment, is the process of making an application and its updates available to its intended users, also called the end users. So to give you an idea of what a production deployment may look like and to work in conditions that are as close as possible to real life, in this lesson, we're going to simulate a production server using a Linux Docker container to which we'll connect using the Secure Shell protocol. A Docker file is a text file that contains all the necessary instructions for building a Docker image. These instructions can be used for installing and configuring command line tools, declaring environment variables, exposing ports, copying files from the local environment, and so on. As an example, let's start by creating a new file named Dockerfile, and within it, let's write the following instructions, which roughly translate to build an image based on Node.js version 16 Alpine and run the following code using the Node CLI tool upon container startup. Let's now convert this Docker file into an actual image using the docker build command, where the T option flag is used to tag the image and the dot represents the directory where the Docker file is located. Finally, let's launch a container based on this image using the docker run command, which will result in the hello world message being printed out to the standard output as defined per the cmd command of the Docker file. Now that you know the basics of building custom images, let's move on to the Docker file that we'll use to run a production-like server. So let's start by creating a new Docker file at the root of our project, and within it, let's write this first instruction. To build our server, we're going to use the latest version of Ubuntu as a base image. However, unlike Ubuntu for desktop, the Ubuntu image for Docker is a minimal image designed for automated deployment at scale. It has a greatly reduced default package set without many convenience tools for interactive usage. To convert this minimal instance into a standard environment suitable for interactive usage, we can use the unminimized command that will install the standard Ubuntu server package for us. Next, we're going to make sure that the package list and available packages are up to date using the apt update and upgrade commands you should be familiar with if you've used Linux before. Once we've done that, we're going to install the following packages, where sudo allows user to run commands as the root user, and OpenSSH server allows to run an SSH server for secure remote connection. Note that the Y option flag is used in non-interactive mode to automatically accept the installation of packages and their dependencies. In order to be able to run Node applications within the container, we're also going to install Node version 18. Now, since by default the only available account is the root account, we're going to create a new user account named Ubuntu using the user add command, which will set its home directory to /home/Ubuntu, sets its default shell to bash, add it to the root and sudo groups, and finally set its user ID to 1000. Once created, we're going to set this new user's password to Ubuntu using the change password command. Let's now expose the ports that will be used by our server, which are the port 22 for SSH, 80 for HTTP, and 443 for HTTPS. And finally, let's specify bash as our container startup command. Now that we're done writing our Docker file, let's build our server's image using the following docker build command in a new terminal window. Once the image is built, let's start a container named production server without forgetting to publish the port 22, 80, and 443 as declared in the Docker file. Finally, let's start the SSH server using the docker exec command, which allows us to execute a command within a running container without having to manually log into it. Now that everything is up and running, let's connect to our container using the SSH client just as if it was a remote server. Once our password entered, we should see a similar prompt appearing, which means that we're successfully connected under the Ubuntu user account. Now that we're all set up, the first thing we have to do in order to be able to clone the project's repository on the production server is to manually generate a new SSH key pair using the SSH keygen tool that will be used to send authenticating requests to GitHub. When prompted with the following question, simply press enter to validate the recommended file path the key pair will be saved at. Now enter any passphrase you want and press enter once again to confirm this passphrase. Once you've got confirmation that a key pair was successfully created, you can display the content of the public key file using the cat command and copy it to the clipboard using Ctrl-C on Linux or Command-C on macOS. From here, to add this SSH key to our GitHub account, open the following link, give that key a short title, paste its content into the key field, and click on the Add SSH Key button to finalize the process. Once you've done that, you can navigate to the application repository page, copy the URL, move back to the server instance, and clone the repository using the git clone command. At the beginning of this course, we configure Git to specifically ignore any configuration file prefixed with .env so that they're never committed to the repository. Since by default Git doesn't track empty directories either, we have to manually create the config directory as well as the configuration file for the production environment. So let's start by entering the directory we just cloned and create these two entries. Once we've done that, let's add the following values to the configuration file, where the server port used for production is now 8000, the JSON Web Token secret is different from the one used in development for security reasons, the database host was updated to match the actual MySQL container's IP address, which can be found using the docker inspect command, and the database synchronization is turned off since it is a destructive operation that should never be performed when in production.